there was a room not too long ago filled up like this about a year and a half ago when a 17-year-old African-American youth was shot and murdered on Sistrunk Boulevard. It's a crime that still remains unsolved, along with many others that are going on in our community. I'm the legislative director for the Dolphin Democrats. I'm also a social worker and serve on many different county boards. And it's really a privilege to have this house is packed with as many esteemed guests and speakers and the great amount of law enforcement. If you turn around, you'll see a sea of blue behind you, or black, or different shades. We're going to first start off, and actually, we're going to have Pete Halden, if you would, from the State Attorney's Office, would you like to come up and actually present on what actually a hate crime is by state statute, how the law perceives it, and how the state defines it.
When I speak, we'll see what happens. Thank you all for coming out tonight. When I was asked to come here and speak, they said, give me the definition of a hate crime. And as we, in law, look at it, there's no real cut and dry definition of what a hate crime is. It all comes down to the facts of the case and who's victimized, unfortunately. But when you look into the law, this is what we got to look at. We're looking at presenting the facts and determine whether a hate crime is going to be something that would be applicable in going forward and filing criminal charge or indicting people on criminal charges. I was with the state attorney's office. I have been now for over 20 years in a homicide unit. Myself and Brian Kavanaugh, who can't be here tonight because he's in a death penalty case involving a homicide right now. Otherwise he'd be here. We prosecuted that homeless case where the man who died was Norris Gaynor. Two other men who were brutally attacked were Mr. Perez and Mr. Pierre. And we looked at this very statutes that I'm going to read to you to see if we could enhance those crimes. I'll talk about that in a minute. Again, 877.19, Hate Crimes Reporting Act, it's called. And basically it goes on to talk about the acquisition and publication of data. The governor, through the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, shall collect and disseminate data on incidents of criminal acts that evidence prejudice based on race, religion, ethnicity, color, ancestry, sexual orientation, or national origin. All law enforcement agencies shall report monthly to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement concerning such offenses in such form and in such manner as prescribed by the rules adopted by the department. Such information shall be compiled by the department and disseminated upon request in any local law enforcement agency, unit of local government or state agency. It goes on to talk a little bit more about that. And what it really does is this, and I'm going to read you that statute too. It'll take a crime of like a felony of a third degree, and if it qualifies as one of those prescribed events I just talked to you about, it'll then enhance it from a misdemeanor to a felony of a third degree, felony of a third degree to a felony of a second degree, felony of a second degree to a felony of a first degree, and to a PBL offense. Let me read this for you now. This is the it's a reclassification act, and for anybody who's taking notes, it's 775.085. And it goes, the penalty for any felony or misdemeanor shall be reclassified as provided in this subsection. If the commission of such felony or misdemeanor evidence is prejudice based on race, color, ancestry, and ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, national origin, mental or physical disability, or advanced age of the victim. And again, it goes on to tell you that a misdemeanor of the second degree reclassified to a misdemeanor of the first degree, a misdemeanor of the first degree reclassified to a felony of the third degree. A felony of the third degree reclassified to a felony of the second degree, and a felony of the second degree reclassified to a felony of the first degree, and a felony of the first degree reclassified to a light felony. Then it goes on to define a few what is mental or physical disability, advanced age, and things of that nature. From our perspective, what that does, it gives us a bit of a, for lack of a better term, some type of hammer to have on somebody. It takes such as a felony of a third degree, which is usually punishable by 5 years in prison. It'll elevate that to a felony of the second degree, which brings that up to 15 to 20 years in Florida State Prison. It takes a felony of the second degree and reclassified it to a first degree, which is up to 30 years in prison. So it's quite a jump that does, this reclassification. When we had the homeless case come in, this is the exact statute we went to go look for. We had one man sleeping on a bench at FIU, caught on videotape, where they took baseball bats. The two gentlemen who did this, young men, were laughing on it. You plainly see that. and he proceeded to swing a baseball bat like you might in a game at a fastball. That gentleman did not die. They then, about an hour and a half later, they went over to Esplanade Park, where Mr. Gaynor was asleep on a park bench. He was a veteran of war. He was sleeping, and they took a baseball bat while he's sleeping. And the first blow, according to testimony, got him right center of the forehead. It was the death blow. They came back, they ran away, came back about 8, 10 minutes later, and they proceeded to hit him 3 to 4 more times. As he was sitting up, profusely bleeding. He continued to hit him. Hour and a half later, they then moved on and went to a place called Church by the Sea, just east of 17th Street Causeway on the bridge. Found another man who was asleep, and they took a baseball bat to him. He did not die either. When we looked at this, we brought it, we read the facts. Fort Lauderdale PD presented the cases. The 2 detectives worked close, Mr. Kavanaugh and myself. We looked at the facts. We then started looking at that very statute I talked to you about, because we knew that the boys that did this, the young men that did this, I should say, they were bragging. They were bragging about how they went out and how they want to go beat up, and this is their words, bums. That was their words. So right then and there, we know that they were going out for a specific intent and purpose to go after some of the most vulnerable people in our society, people who are unfortunate and homeless, and most likely there'd be nobody else around them. At 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, they'd be by themselves. Shoot, 2 of them were asleep, right? Anyway, after looking at the statute and reading the papers and the public outcry and everything that was out there was no enhancement that we could use. It didn't qualify under the qualifications that I read you. It just wasn't there. Quite frankly, the case ended up working out, and we would not have used them anyway, because the verdicts that were returned were murder in the 2nd degree, and they were punishable by life anyway, and one of them did get life, and the other one got 30 years. So the enhancements we were able to, we did not use, and we didn't need them at that time, thankfully. If they would have came back with a lesser charge, then the enhancements definitely would have been one of the things we would have looked at. But this is what we got to do. We just can't say, define me what is a hate crime. You got to look at every case as a factual basis, individual, and see if it qualifies into what we're reading right now. You're going to hear from Representative Porthain in a little bit, and Ari happens to work in the office with us. When this came about, one of the calls we made was to Ari. Hey Ari, I think we got a problem here. You might want to look at this. And he's taking up the cause of that right now. I'm going to be available for comments. I'm trying to limit it to 5 minutes, but we'll certainly talk about it a little bit more. Thank you.
Andrew Rosenkrantz, who's the Florida Regional Director for the Anti-Defamation League.
The ADL stands for the Anti-Defamation League. We've been around for almost 100 years. I think we're in our 96th, 97th year of existence. And we basically stand for 2 things. Our mission statement is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment for all citizens alike. So we stand up for ourselves, and we stand up for all minorities, all races, and all ethnicities. One of the things that Michael asked me to talk about is to put a little more meat around the hate crime statute, which was actually in Florida originally. The original copy of it was drafted by the Anti-Defamation League. It's now been passed by so many states. I know Lori later is going to talk about a federal version of the hate crimes bill. There's a difference between perception in the community and what actually might qualify as a hate crime. And as was explained before, we see this all the time in our office. When somebody is targeted because of their ethnicity, when somebody is targeted because of their race or their sexual orientation or their religion or whatever the case may be, and there's evidence of that, that is what raises something to the level of a hate crime. And there needs to be specific evidence of that. In certain situations, we know that there is strong evidence that hate is involved. When a swastika is drawn on the side of a Chabad house, a synagogue in Parkland, that's pretty strong evidence. When a gay or lesbian man or woman is attacked, and during that attack there are anti-gay slogans that are shouted during that attack. That's pretty good evidence that hate is a motivating factor so that it can rise to the level of a hate crime. But it's a very particular, specific instance. Now that does not mean, however, that the community ought to remain silent when there is a perception of hate that may be involved in whatever the incident is. So let me give some examples of that. When a mosque is riddled with bullets, when a person is attacked on the streets, but you don't really know if the attack is an attack of opportunity because he's walking alone at night at 2 in the morning, or if it's an attack against him because he's African American, and that's the motivating factor. Irrespective, the community needs to come back together, even if there's an inkling of hate motivation, together and stand up and stand out against it. I can't tell you how important it is for community leaders to stick up for one another. Because let me tell you something. In my experience, I know this to be true. The sheriff's office, the community leaders, the representatives' offices, the politicians, the newspapers who write the articles, they collect your information. They want to know when they think they've done a good job. They want to hear from you when they think that you have done a good job. They actually tally those things up. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a reporter about a report of a potential hate incident in the community. The reporter will say to me, you know, I got 413 emails on this one story. That is very, very positive. At the Anti-Defamation League, we believe very strongly, and for those of you who know some of Jewish history will recognize this phrase. A famous rabbi, Rabbi Hillel, once said, if I'm only for myself, what am I? If I'm not for myself, who is going to be for me, and if not now, when? Which basically means this. I've got to stand up for myself, but I also need to rely on other people to stand up for me. When the Chabad house in Parkland was drawn with a swastika on the side, who was there? Your sheriff, Al Lamberti, was there on the scene to condemn it. So many times things happen in the community, and sometimes with graffiti and things of incidents of hate that occur in the community, it may be kids. And kids, when you catch them and when you start prosecuting them and when you start interviewing them, say to you, no, I didn't think it was that big a deal. When community leaders like your sheriff or your clergy person or your representative stand up and speak out, it has such a powerful impact. Because it tells the parents of these children, it tells the school, it tells the kids, this is not acceptable. It is a big deal, and we all need to stand together, and we all need to speak out against it. Oftentimes, hate manifests itself in the school system. Florida last year finally and eventually passed an anti-bullying law that mandates that bullying procedures need to be adopted across the state. That's fantastic because there is a problem in the school system. So many times when hate is enacted and bullying is enacted in schools, we find administrators and we find principals don't want to address it publicly because they'd rather not bring the attention upon themselves. And we always say at the Anti-Defamation League, you need to address it publicly. You need to stand up. You can't brush it under the rug. The parents are trying to teach their children what's acceptable, and you're the leader. You have to stand up and say, it happened, I know it happened, we're going to address it, and this is unacceptable. That's the kind of positive message with hate incidents and hate crimes that we need to send to our community. You know, one of the patterns that we're seeing is a lot more of an aggressive expression of hatred. Some of the speakers who have already been here this evening have talked about some of the acts of violence that have taken place. The graffiti on the sides of walls, the bullying in schools, is absolutely horrible, but there are some anecdotes to it. Standing up, speaking out. Education of our children is the way in which you combat homophobia, racism, bigotry, and anti-Semitism. Let me tell you something. You have to learn hatred. We at the ADL, we've been in the hatred business, unfortunately, monitoring this kind of stuff for a long time. And I can tell you from experience, it is a learned trait. You get it from somewhere. You're not born with it. But just like hatred is born, or is learned rather, the opposite can also be taught. Love, understanding, acceptance of our differences, celebration of our cultural diversity, that can be taught as well. You start at a young age and you reinforce it over and over and over again. I was asked, how do you answer those who argue against hate crime legislation by stating that you cannot legislate thought? And, you know, this goes back to one of the things that I was saying before. You're not legislating against thought. A lot of the misperceptions in the community is that the hate crime statute actually makes it a crime to hate. You know, it's not a crime to hate in this country. It's called freedom of speech and freedom of thought. You're not legislating against thought. What a hate crime statute does, and this is what was explained by Assistant State Attorney Holden, is it's a penalty enhancement statute. That's what it does. If you vandalize somebody's home, that's a crime. But if you vandalize somebody's home and it's an element of hate, such as a swastika on the side of it, all right, then all of a sudden it enhances the penalty. So you're not legislating against thought. You were legislating against the action, but if there's some kind of hate impetus behind it, then that's what makes it rise to the level of a hate crime. I know that there are so many community leaders here, and I'm going to leave you with one thought. Please, don't stand up just for yourselves. Stand up for others as well. When a television station in Tampa, Florida airs a half-hour promotional commercial that is as homophobic as you can possibly expect it to be, that television station ought to get letters from the Jews, the Catholics, the Italians, the GLCC, and everybody. When there is a swastika or a sign of the White House, that community leader, that rabbi, ought to get letters and calls from everybody. When there is a mosque that is riddled with bullets in South Kendall in Miami, the imam ought to be getting responses from everybody in the community that this is unacceptable. I can't tell you how much it means to all of the different groups to know that you are not alone, that you have the support of your sheriff, you have the support of your representatives, and you have the support of the entire community. And this is not going to happen in our community, and we are going to stand up and stand out against it. Thank you.
Our next guest is very well known, and I don't need to say anymore, Sheriff Al Lamberti.
It was mentioned before how this kind of struck a nerve with me. Right after I was appointed in early 2008, I happened to read the Attorney General's hate crimes report for 2007. And when I was skimming through it, it's like a bunch of mail you get. I didn't expect to see anything. It was like a normal state report. But it said two things. It said, one, that Broward County was the most diverse county in the state of Florida. And it listed the criteria that they used: race, religion, ethnicity, national orientation, sexual orientation, languages spoken. It said we were #1 in the state. And then you get back to the rest of the report, it also said that we led the state in hate crimes. And that really struck a nerve, and that disturbed me. Because when I grew up, and it was great that Andy said that, you know, it's learned, hate is learned, but the reverse also can be taught as well. Because that's how I grew up. I grew up in New York, the Bronx, and my neighborhood was Italian American and Jewish. And we didn't know it at the time, but we were celebrating each other's diversity. I just didn't know it. You see, because my Jewish friends came to my house because they liked my mom's lasagna and cannolis. And I used to go to their house for knishes and matzo ball soup. And we learned about each other's cultures, and I didn't know it was cultural diversity at the time. You know, I realize that now. But we had the best of both worlds. See, they came to my house and celebrated Christmas, and I went to their house and celebrated Hanukkah. So we had it all covered. And I didn't realize till later on that that's what we were doing, celebrating each other's diversity. And that's what needs to happen now. And that's why we created this hate crimes task force, because I don't want to be #1 in the county. That shouldn't be. You've already heard Pete Holden talk to you about what a hate crime is, how it's defined. But some more disturbing news, in a way, is the hate crime groups, and that's what I want to talk about real quick, is the hate crime groups that we deal with in the state of Florida. Nationwide, hate crime groups have risen 50% since 2000. These kind of groups are tracked by everybody. ADL has a whole investigative arm that they track these groups nationally. The Southern Poverty Law Center puts out reports on a regular basis. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement manages it statewide. Since 2000, hate crime groups that have been identified have gone from 602 to 926 nationwide. That's a 50% increase. In Florida, we rank 3rd. California's number 1, Texas is number 2, Florida is number 3 in the number of hate crime groups identified. We've identified 56 in the state of Florida. And here's what they are. In Florida, we have 4 Ku Klux Klan chapters, KKK, 4 of them. 14 neo-Nazi groups. Neo-Nazi groups are basically the Aryan Nation type groups, the Aryan supremacy groups. Those are the neo-Nazi groups. 6 white nationalist groups. Those are like the white supremacist groups. 7 racist skinhead groups. We have skinheads in our jail. We have a skinhead chapter here in Davie. Okay. 2 Christian identity groups. And those are basically anti-Semitic groups. They're racist groups. 12 neo-Confederate groups. You may ask, what's that? Okay, that's, the old, going back to the Deep South Southern days, correct, Confederate flags and all that stuff. 12 neo-Confederate groups. We have 9 black separatist groups. Those are black supremacist groups. These are in Florida. We have 2 what we call general hate groups. They hate everybody. But those are the anti-Semitic, anti-gay, anti-immigration. They fall into, you can't pin anything on them. They're just hate groups. And they cover the whole gamut. We've identified 2 of those in the state of Florida. There are some of those that are Holocaust denial groups that say the Holocaust didn't happen. There are some that are racist music groups that they put out extremely racist rap music. Okay? And it can take many forms, we all know that. So far in 2009, I said we were number 1, we don't have the year finished yet. 2009 BSO, we've investigated 5 hate crimes. I'll tell you about those in a minute, but 3 of them were hate crimes based on race. 2 of them were hate crimes based on sexual orientation. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. I want to talk about Crime Stoppers real quick. At the Stonewall Library dedication, we talked about the 2 incidents, what I call the Peter Pan incidents, in Oakland Park on Dixie Highway, where individually, 2 separate incidents, 2 gay men were assaulted and robbed. We looked at that as a potential hate crime. While we were there at the Stonewall Library, Crime Stoppers was there putting out flyers about that incident. And I don't know if it was because of that day, but that crime was solved by a Crime Stoppers tip. We got calls about 5 individuals who did it. We brought in 3 rounded up 3 of them in the first group, 2 in the second, and made arrests. Now, Andy mentioned it, Pete mentioned it. You don't know if it's a hate crime until you catch the person and you can interrogate them as to what they were thinking when they committed the crime. And we looked at it as a potential hate crime because both were gay men. When we caught the guys, we brought the individuals in, it was a random robbery, street robbery. They were alone at night and they targeted him for a robbery. It was a crime of opportunity. It turned out they didn't know that they were gay, so therefore the hate crime part of it goes out. But when we were interrogating, two of the individuals who were involved confessed to another crime that they committed. in Pompano Beach. Similar to Pete Holden talking about targeting the homeless individuals. They targeted a homeless person in Pompano Beach, savagely beat him because he was sleeping at night and savagely beat him, didn't kill him. But we didn't even know about it because it was unreported. But they videotaped it and put it on YouTube. Okay? It went unreported because the victim never came forward. We still don't know who the victim is. So, but at least we know. Now that person was targeted because he was homeless. When Commander Wisbicki and I started looking at that particular case, we said, you know, we had the Fort Lauderdale case that he just prosecuted. Because of that case, the state of Maryland added homelessness as a criteria, a category, a protected category in their hate crime statute. And it's the only state in the country that has homelessness in their hate crime statute. And they based it because of Pete Holden's case that he prosecuted that happened in Fort Lauderdale. And when Rick and I got together, we said, hey, look, if they just passed it, their past legislative session, and it was based on our case, you know, we need to do the same thing. So I know that Ari Porth is going to be the chair of the legislative delegation next year. So Rick and I said, well, what a perfect person to go to and get this done. And we sat with Ari, and he's going to come up here and talk about it. But I will, well, you guys are tough. 3 minutes.
We'll let you go over to 10.
Okay, there you go. So anyway, went to Ari, he's going to talk about that, but we need to get that done. Last thing I want to plug real quick. Everybody's involved in social networking, right? MySpace, Facebook, Twitter. Okay, we have just launched our own version of Twitter. We wanted to do this separately because Twitter is not a secure site. And we didn't want to put out information to you on an unsecure site. So we have started our own Twitter site. It's called Cybervisor. Anybody in the county can sign up for it. If you live in one of our districts, you can choose a district, or you can get countywide notifications. These cards will be up here. They're also on the table there by the door. It tells you how to sign up. You go to our website, and what you will get alerts either on your BlackBerry or text messages on your cell phone from us on things that are going on in your neighborhood or your area of the county. A lot of agencies are going to Facebook and Twitter. We think this is much secure. I'd ask you to sign up for that. The cards are there. Please let us know how we can better serve you, but you'll get these alerts in any one of your neighborhoods. Thank you for letting me be here tonight. Michael.
The next speaker actually is going to be Commander Richard Wisbicki from the Broward Sheriff's Office, and he's going to be discussing the latest initiative of the Sheriff's Office.
Thank you. One of the things in the task force that we depend on is intelligence. It has to be accurate intelligence about where the hate crime incidents are happening, who's doing them. And we're not only looking at Broward County, but we look at the state, we look at the nation. The sheriff mentioned the Southern Property Law Center, which is located in Montgomery, Alabama. We use them, and Andy's ADL group is absolutely fantastic in giving us the reports that we need. The Southern Property Law Center just released July 1st an extensive report on all the domestic hate incidents that happened since Oklahoma City. There have been 75. One of them really concerned me, and I wanted to share it with you. It's about 4 Ku Klux Klan men in Fort Worth, Texas. They were planning to bomb an oil refinery. Luckily, one of them flipped and went to the local FBI. Now, the oil refinery was next to a religious school. Can anybody guess what the projected body count would be? 30,000. It amazed me when I read that report. And one of the things the report says too is where the targets before were political, now they want to up the body count. That's what's important to these radical right organizations. And the reason they want to up the body count is they want a higher body count than Tim McVeigh's. So it's a really disturbing report. Also wanted to follow up, earlier this year at Oakland Park, we had the incident involving Reverend Phelps. Does everybody remember that? And the plague? Well, he's resurfaced. He's resurfaced in a different manner, though. Now he is targeting people of the Jewish faith. I'm sure Andy is aware of the Westboro Baptist Church. And about a month ago, he was going to resurface in Miami and picket the Israeli consulate. I don't know if that happened or not. But it just got, we did a really good job in cooperation with the Oakland Park District, our Homeland Security. We mobilized, we went out there that Friday night. We worked with Scott Hall, the Gay American Heroes, and luckily he didn't show up. We had a pretty good show of force there, and I think that may have been a deterrent, and I'm glad we were there. Other than that, I deal with these hate crimes a lot. It's getting worse. Every month we get a monthly intelligence report from the Southern Poverty Law Center, and the June '09 report had the most violent of hate incidents in the country in the history since they've been doing this. It's staggering. I looked the past 2 years, and it's just spiking up, and it's going to get worse. I'm just glad we have a very proactive sheriff who sees the problem and is going to address it.
One of my major heroes. Lori Flink is going to be speaking. She's the Deputy District Director for Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz's office. And if anybody ever knows Debbie, she is a very, very outspoken advocate and champion for the underserved communities. And I just want a big round of applause. Lori.
This evening on behalf of Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And although the Congresswoman cannot be here tonight due to votes in Washington, please know that she's a great friend to the GLCC, the Dolphin Democrats, the entire LGBT community, and believes strongly that the Democratic majority in the House has the opportunity and the responsibility to move towards legal equality for all Americans. Vice Chair of the House LGBT Equality Caucus, Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz fights passionately for the extension of equal rights, the repeal of discriminatory laws, the elimination of hate-motivated violence, and the improved health and well-being for all, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity or expression. Debbie Wasserman Schultz is proud to be an original co-sponsor of H.R. 1913. The Local Law Enforcement Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2009, which I'm going to talk a little bit about here tonight. I believe in all your chairs I left an actual text of the bill itself. About 300 plus organizations, leaders, civic groups who have endorsed the legislation, a Q&A, and the Congresswoman's floor statement, so please feel free to review that. Now, what is the Local Law Enforcement Hate Crimes Prevention Act? The LLEHCPA will streamline the process for the Department of Justice to assist local authorities to investigate and prosecute hate crimes and permit federal involvement in cases that occur because of the victim's gender, disability, gender identity, or sexual orientation, which a lot of you know was a sticking point that prevented this law from being passed for many, many years. And it's thanks to your efforts and advocacy groups across this nation that sexual orientation is now included in the definition of hate crime bias. So you should give yourself the bill also makes grants available to state and local communities to combat violent crimes committed by juveniles, to train law enforcement officers, or to assist state and local investigations and prosecutions of bias-motivated crimes. Existing federal law is inadequate to address the significant national problem of hate crimes. The current law contains obstacles to effective enforcement and does not provide authority to investigate and prosecute bias crimes based on disability, gender, gender identity, or sexual orientation. Now, H.R. 1913 fills that gap and was introduced into the 111th Congress by Representatives John Conyers of Michigan and Mark Kirk in Illinois. And it was referred to the House Judiciary Committee on April 23rd and reported favorably by a vote of 15 to 12. April 29th, it passed the House by reported vote 249 to 175. And it's currently in the Senate Judiciary Committee. It is Senate S909, sponsored by Senator Ted Kennedy, Massachusetts, and it's called the Matthew Shepard Hate Crimes Prevention Act. It currently has 45 co-sponsors, including Florida Senator Bill Nelson, but not Senator Mel Martinez, should you be so inclined to send an email or make a phone call. So, He is not running for re-election, but let's hope he has a decent bone in his body and will listen to your calls. Now, Andy did touch on this issue, but it does bear repeating, and that's the First Amendment. There are some opponents of this legislation who, claim it infringes on the First Amendment, limiting freedom of speech. Now, let me be very clear. The local Law Enforcement Hate Crimes Prevention Act does not burden speech, thought, or association. It is a carefully crafted measure that protects First Amendment rights while combating violent, bias-motivated crime. The Act, in fact, contains multiple provisions designed to ensure free speech and association rights. Now, first, in order for an incident to be classified a hate crime under this legislation, a bias-motivated crime must involve death or serious bodily injury, or it must be an attempt to cause bodily injury to a person through the use of fire, a firearm, an explosive, or incendiary device. Secondly, the Act contains language that clarifies First Amendment rights will be protected, including free speech and free exercise of religion. And third, the Act contains language that will make clear that speech and association rights will not be burdened. The bill is endorsed by notable individuals from more than 300 law enforcement organizations, civil rights, civic, and religious organizations.
Our next speaker is a wonderful advocate and somebody who I've had the pleasure to attend meetings with while I was completing my social work internship as a victim advocate for the State Attorney's Office. And her name is Sharon Deosano. She's with the Office of the Attorney General. She's the Deputy Director of Division of Victim Services and Criminal Justice. And what she's going to talk about is pretty much the impact that crimes have on victims and the resources that are out there. And she's even going to tell you what more we need to do. And there's a lot more we do need to do.
Thank you very much, Michael. I really do appreciate that. As Michael said, please continue, grab some water. I'm totally blind, I can't see you getting up, so it won't distract me too much. And if you think that I work well with time frame, you can go like this. It doesn't work for me. But my husband has my clock, and he's going to try to keep me on time. I'm probably the only one who's not going to respond to any hand gestures. Yes, that's all you got to do is disconnect. But my voice is very loud, and I can continue on without it. My name is Sharon Desanio. I am no longer formerly known as the Deputy Director for Victim Services. I am now moved into a different position, and that is as the Victim Services Administrator. I can't even remember it. Victim Services Administrator in our Division of Civil Rights. So that's where this comes in. A little bit about one of the first obvious glaring problems or issues that I detected when I first moved into that division. People usually don't move me somewhere if they don't want to find some problems, and usually I'm pretty good at finding them out. But I will tell you, I did not choose my profession, it actually chose me. And Sheriff Lamberti probably even remembers the situation because he was around back then. But back 29 years ago, this past May 23rd of 1980, I was the victim of crime. Now, I'm not a native Floridian. I had just moved down in January of 1979 from Cleveland, Ohio. And within, well, just a little over after my year I moved down here, I was the victim of a violent crime. But that's something you can't predict. You can't predict when or where, and you shouldn't have to live in fear either that you will be the victim of a crime. And just a very short, brief story of how my life was dramatically changed was as I was driving north on 95, headed west on Sample Road to my new house in West Boca. Back then, the roads were quite different. And as I was driving, there was a vehicle behind me. The person pulled up next to me like they were going to pass, fired 3 shots into my car. 1 bullet went right through both eyes. I did manage to pull the car off to the side of the road, laid on the horn to summon help. A man's voice appeared out of the darkness by offering assistance by saying, "My God, who did this? I'll help you and I'll take you to the hospital." Grateful for the Good Samaritan, I allowed him to help me over to his vehicle. He placed me in his car. We drove around for a while. He told me that we were at the hospital. Instead, I was taken to his apartment where I was stabbed, raped, and left for dead. Obviously, I survived. I'm still here. I'm breathing. General. Detectives at that time, Fort Lauderdale detectives Doug Haas and Vicki Russo, were called. They were homicide detectives who investigated the case. I didn't know why homicide was called. I still survived. But they were still called to investigate the crime. They did make an apprehension with the assistance of the North Miami Beach Police Department. This crime went all the way from Coconut Creek, BSO, Fort Lauderdale, North Miami, and the suspect was apprehended. He was a repeat offender from upstate New York who had done this before. They said I was strictly a victim of a random shooting. His identity was he actually targeted women, blonde women. And he was upset the evening because his girlfriend had just left. Apparently he had stabbed her with an ice pick. And she had left, moved back to New York. That evening he went out, started drinking, was doing some drugs, just happened to see me as I was driving by in my car and targeted me as his next victim. I had no idea who he was. The only physical description I have of the man who forever changed my life was given to me by Doug, Detective Haas. He said it was a 32-year-old white male from upstate New York. That was it. As I was lying in that hospital bed, I didn't know how my life was to change, but when I came out, I found out. Being a mother, 30 years old, with 3 small children, ages 3, 7, and 9, and the man I was married to for 10 years, I found out what my life, the projections for my life was going to be. My husband of 10 years, the man I was married to, not you, honey, at that time, of course, decided the situation was just going to be way too difficult for him and he wanted out. He didn't want to be married to a blind wife. That was okay. I released him of his obligation, put my foot on his behind and showed him the door. Because I told him if his happiness wasn't with me and the children, then he was going to have to fly free and find it elsewhere. He couldn't continue to make our life miserable, threatening me with the loss of my children, that he was going to leave and stay, take the children, take the house, and then no, leave me alone. The man who attacked me was actually sentenced. He was charged with 2 counts of second-degree attempted murder, sexual battery for the rape, and kidnapping. And on November 3rd of 1980, Judge Stanton Kaplan, not Michael, Stanton, sentenced him to an aggregate total of 104 years in prison. That is where he sits today. Now, the unfortunate part is that the detectives, the one detective who came down to testify during the trial, we found out that this man may have been responsible for as many as 100 unsolved homicides in upper New York State. We only have one other victim who felt comfortable coming forward and actually survived his attack. And for that crime, he received a total of 8 years in prison. Served 6, was released on parole, came out and committed another violent crime against another woman who did not want to prosecute the case. She did not want to testify. He was put back into prison to serve out the remaining 2 years on his sentence, was released, came down to Florida and attacked me. He is still sitting in the Okeechobee facility today. Now, my life progressed. I started speaking about the inequities of the criminal justice system and how victims were treated unfairly. I was not allowed to be in the courtroom during the trial. But those are the old days. I started speaking out in 1981, 82, 83, and in 1984, the Victims of Crime Act was passed. We just celebrated 25 years of victim assistance, and that was predicated upon the belief that every victim of crime is entitled to comprehensive quality services. It said nothing about gender, ethnicity, race, religion. It said nothing about gender orientation, that you had to look a certain way, be a certain way, have a certain be from a certain socioeconomic group. It said every victim of crime is entitled to quality comprehensive services. Also with that Victims of Crime Act there was money associated. There were grants that were given out to the states, and in 1986, the state of Florida received their first allocations. We also received money that went to the Crime Victims Compensation Trust Fund, which has changed over the years. When it was first passed in 1978, 1978, implemented in 79, it was first housed in the Department of Labor. My case was rejected. They said I did not suffer serious financial hardship. Well, they knew very little about the impact of victimization. So in 1990, the Division of Victim Services out of the Attorney General's office began distributing the Crime Victims Compensation Trust Fund. It is not perfect. It has changed over the years. State Statute 960.01 through 28 is the Victims of Crime Compensation Trust Fund. All of you in the room, if you have the wherewithal to take a look at 960, take a look at it. We will act on suggestions. It has been modified throughout the years to include more victims. Children who witness violence in the home are eligible for mental health counseling. This is the financial assistance program that will provide money for those victims who cannot afford the medical treatment. Psychological counseling. When I was moved over to our Division of Civil Rights, I took a look at both of our statutes, 775 and 877. The Hate Crimes Act itself includes hate and bias crimes based on ethnicity, race, religion, and it also includes disability or age. The problem is, the Hate Crimes Reporting Act, 877, does not include disability or age. So, when you take a look at our past hate crimes report that was issued, I said there were 0 crimes based on disabilities. When we know that children, people with mental illness, are victims of crime, we're going to have to change that to include them. And that is what House Bill, Debbie Wasserman Schultz's House Bill 1913 is going to include disabilities. And hopefully Senate Bill 909 will also include. The reason I say this is because anyone with a disability can be the victim of a crime as well, and you never know when you are going to acquire disability in your lifetime. Through various conditions, situations, you can acquire disability, and I will tell you, I can't tell you the number of times that people have treated me differently. 30 years I had no disability, I have a lot to compare it to now. Let me leave you with one last thought though, because I'm so happy that the GLCC hosted this event tonight, because we can all make a difference. No one can do anything alone. It takes a lot of voices speaking out. Maya Angelou said in a rather lengthy poem, but one specific line stayed out and stuck out in my mind when she said, "History with all of its wretched pain cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again." We
Our next speaker is our local champion on this issue. And if I could have State Representative Ari Porth please come up.
In 1996, I was a relatively new prosecutor. I was assigned to the juvenile division. My trial partner was a guy named John Patterson, who's now doing very well as a civil trial lawyer. And a case came into our division where a young boy was pushed down and he was kicked repeatedly. And he was kicked in the ear. And he was hearing impaired and he was learning disabled. And while the aggressor was kicking him, he was yelling, "Can you hear this? Can you hear this?" Fortunately for the victim, he wasn't hurt bad enough for the state attorney's office to file more serious aggravated battery charges against the aggressor. But John and I came back to the office and we looked at the Florida Hate Crimes Enhancement Statute and we thought, this seems like it's a hate crime. This is a young person who was pursued because he was an easy target, because he was a person with a disability, both learning disabled and hearing impaired. Disability was not in the hate crimes enhancement. That was my first taste of a hate crime. I contacted my friend Skip Campbell, our former state senator. Skip addressed the issue in Tallahassee. He got hate crimes he got protections for persons with disabilities added to Florida's hate crimes enhancement statute. And we need the same law changed again in Florida for the homeless community. Whether you are a 17-year-old gay man shot in Fort Lauderdale out of ignorance and hate in the case of Simi Williams, whether you are a 19-year-old Vietnamese man attacked and beaten to death by a mob yelling racial epithets in my town of Coral Springs in the case of Nguyen Phan Nguyen, whether you are a 45-year-old homeless man sleeping in a park, beaten to death for sport in the case of Norris Gaynor. Hateful crimes like these must not be tolerated, and justice requires additional protection for our most vulnerable. House Bill 11 was filed at the suggestion of our sheriff. It will add homelessness to our hate crimes enhancement law in Florida. As the sheriff told you, Maryland passed theirs last year because a legislator was disgusted after seeing footage right here in Fort Lauderdale, the case that Pete prosecuted. Homeless had nowhere to retreat, and they are our most vulnerable. And it has been said that society must be judged by how we treat our most vulnerable. Florida needs to follow Maryland's good lead. I wanted to recognize, and I hope that he is here, Gerald Peterkin. Is Gerald here from the Coalition to End Homelessness? Gerald, thank you for being here. The Coalition to End Homelessness has been very supportive of this effort, and I wanted to thank Gerald and thank Laura Hansen, who he works with. With their help and the help of Rep. Rogers and my other colleagues, we're going to pass this good bill. Haters are not Democrats or Republicans. We have haters of all parties. Haters are bipartisan. Problem solvers need to be bipartisan too. And that is why this is a bipartisan effort. The sheriff and I have come together because this needs to be addressed. We are going to get this bill passed regardless of the makeup of the legislature. This is an issue that's important to all people, and I certainly appreciate your support. Thank you so much.
For your question. What I'm going to do in the meantime, there were some questions that were handed in, and I'm going to go over those quickly because they were very good ones. And I guess this one, to whoever wants to answer it, what group category is not covered under hate crime legislation?
You heard a pretty complete description from Peter. Advanced age, disability, national origin, ethnicity, race, religion, sexual orientation. What we're missing in Florida is homelessness, and that's the reason that the sheriff suggested we file this bill.
Incidents of a noose left on a work desk with a note. Can the victim call law enforcement or report to the state attorney instead of paying a private attorney to institute a civil discrimination action assault?
Yes. We would encourage it. That was the whole point of this forum, is to encourage you to report those things. We had a similar incident at the airport. You can call the local jurisdiction where you're at, where that police department is, or just call us and we'll get it to the right person. 765-4321, 7 down to 1. That's our non-emergency number. It won't be from BSO, but if there is an agency that doesn't want to take it, we'll do anything in Broward County. It doesn't matter. So if you want to call us directly, we'll get it to the right person, or we'll handle it ourselves.
State your name and your question. Be very brief, please. No need to raise the hand. We stand.
Okay. My name is Michael Mayberry. I'm a resident of Wilton Manors. My question is for our esteemed sheriff. And it's kind of in line with the director of the GLC's opening statement about, I think he was referring to gay people's unfounded fears of law enforcement. In Los Angeles, the LA Sheriff's Department Detention Division, when someone is brought in intake, they are specifically asked if they are gay. If they say yes, they are put aside, and then they are taken to a segregated area, and they go through the whole criminal justice system with that label. Has there ever been a need for that with BSO, and has that ever come up in discussion with the sheriff's office?
It has not, but that's why we have this blank piece of paper here, because I'm going to write notes on that and check on that for you. And I know Michael does a lot of work in the jail. I know he's had some experience with that. We try to do classification on, there's a whole classification scheme on where we put people in the jail for their own protection, and that does enter into it. But I'll give you a specific answer as far as the booking procedure. We don't do that in the booking procedure, but once a person is placed in custody in the main jail or one of the other facilities, we do group people and classify them for their own protection.
What I will say to follow up quickly on that question is I have been in the protective custody unit in the main jail where men that fit certain characteristics that usually tend to be a little bit more feminine In that cell are predominantly individuals who would identify as being transgender. They're much safer. If they're mixed in with the general population, they're at risk for rape beyond you could ever fathom. They're a wonderful community that actually have incredible peer support from one another. I walked in there one day and they were braiding one another's hair. So if I'm ever locked up for any reason, please send me to the 6th floor.
My name is Janet Anderson, and I'm not really particularly with any particular, or I'm not in any official capacity. My question, and I'm not really sure who to advise this to because it really is sort of a legal question, is whether there is any difference, you see any difference between gender expression and gender identity as it relates to the hate crime bill. Why I'm bringing that up is that there may be people who are cross-dressers who would not be, their gender identity would be male, but they're presenting themselves as being female, or vice versa. And as well as people who are what other people would normally consider as being part of the transgender community.
I think probably what you have learned tonight is how technical the hate crime statute is, and I will read you a specific portion. The answer to your question is generally yes, it would be covered. The statute says that a hate crime is a criminal act against a person who chooses the victim because of the victim's, and this is the key language, real or perceived race, gender, sexual orientation, or whatever the case may be. So the answer is generally yes. I'm glad you asked that question because I'm telling you this is such a technical statute that we are dealing with. And yes, the answer is if there is a perception that the person is being attacked because of gender identity, it certainly would classify.
Speak to that as well, and you do have a copy of it there where it does say specifically that is motivated by prejudice based on actual or perceived race, color, religion, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability of the victim is a violation of state, local, or tribal hate crime laws. So,
hi, my name is Rich Cohen. I live in Margate, Florida. A very close friend of mine, Craig Cohen, was the victim of what I consider a hate crime. On April 6th, he was coming home from Peter Pan Diner, attacked by 5 men, or 5 men who were in the attack. He was literally robbed of his cell phone. Now, I'd like to know, what do you tell his family who have visited him yesterday? He's lying in a coma for 3 months. He's in a hospice. The night he came into the hospital, he had to have almost half of his skull removed because if not, the swelling in the brain would have killed him. He's paralyzed on the left side. He can't speak. He can't talk. And here's a man who's been a member of society. He's worked for the Broward School District for over 20 years. A good individual. He was robbed of his cell phone. He was robbed of his life. How do you tell his family that he's not a victim of a hate crime?
Sir, since we made the arrest on that case, I mean, he's definitely going to be prosecuted for the vicious beating. But you've heard Mr. Holden say it, you've heard Harry say it, and Mr. Rosencrantz say it. The statute is very technical. When we interviewed those people, they did not know that he was gay. And unless you can prove that they knew, or that's the reason they picked on him, you can't charge him with the hate crime. If they didn't know it, it was bad enough, but it doesn't fit the hate crime statute. You have to be able to prove that they knew he was gay, or they targeted him because he was gay. We interrogated those 5 guys. None of them knew. It was just a robbery, a crime of opportunity. And as these folks have said, the hate crime statute is very, very clear, very specific. You got to be able to prove that they knew.
Mr. Cohen, I don't know what to tell you that either. Ms. Anderson, you asked a question that was very similar to that. And I'm going to tell you, it always comes back to what I said. What are the facts? What did they tell you? We can't dive into people's minds sometimes. We can't know they're doing it for a certain reason. Certainly common sense is going to tell you a lot. But that's not all we need to prove in that court of criminal law. The Fort Lauderdale, the homicide unit, when they did the homeless case that we had, Mr. Gaynor's death, Mr. Perez and Mr. Pierre. They asked those specific questions, and these kids came out and said we're out to be, and I told you, bums. That would have qualified my mind, no doubt about it. But if I don't know the facts of your case, I don't have it, not assigned to me, but what Sheriff Lamberti said is absolutely right. I'm not saying it's fair. That's the way the law is right now.
I just want to add to that those 5 guys were partying in a house right next to Peter Pan. They were doing drugs and alcohol, and they made the statements they were just looking to pick off an easy target, a single person walking down the road. That's how they picked their target.
Hi, my name is Babs Kaspar Sipperstein. I'm actually from New Jersey. But I was here having dinner with a friend who told me about the hate. I'm here a couple of times a year. My grandchildren are in Florida. But it was mentioned at this meeting with the hate crimes. And in New Jersey, I was one of the lead advocates in amending New Jersey's hate crimes law to include gender identity expression as well as disability. And I was very concerned because I didn't hear anything about gender identity in your current law. And the recent, someone had come up and questioned, and there was a gentleman that said sexual orientation, actual or perceived sexual orientation is the same as, no, it's not quite the same as HR 1913, which talks about actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity. The last 8 years, on my birthday, I've been spending lighting candles for transgendered people around the world who have died. Many of them absolutely unknown. My question is, why aren't transgender people covered? And is there any movement to add gender identity or expression to the hate crimes law?
Let me just say that I'll make a commitment to work with you, Babs, and Michael, and the transgender community on seeing if we can do something in Florida on the issue. I'm fully supportive of it. We unfortunately are going to have a difficult time moving it with some of the leadership in Tallahassee, but you have my commitment to try to help.
My name is Jed Shea, and I'm an Oakland Park resident. My question is for Sheriff Lamberti. I attended the first hate crimes forum about 6 months ago, and was really shocked to learn that we lead the state in the number of hate crimes. My question is there any way to decipher or look at that statistic to determine, is it that we lead the state in the number of hate crimes, or are we doing a better job of getting them reported, getting witnesses to support whether our clients are hate crimes?
You're absolutely right. You can only go by what's reported. And I think, and that's why we were listed number 1. And you're probably right, some other counties around the state probably don't do as good a job reporting it as we do. And that's probably a curse, because the fact that we are so good at reporting it, that did bring us to number 1. We may not be in reality, but we don't know, because a lot of those crimes go unreported. What we're trying to do, through Crime Stoppers, everything else, is that we don't be afraid to report it. And that's like the incident I talked about, the homeless one in Pompano Beach. We didn't even know it occurred until those 5 guys from Peter Pan told us that they did it. Because victims are reluctant to come forward in some of these situations. So you're probably right. We probably lead the state because we report it better than anyone else. But a statistic is a statistic either way. We're still number 1. That's not good.
And Sharon?
I really need to respond to that. Sheriff, I know the statistics came out of our hate crimes report, but those are the statistics that are reported by local law enforcement. Those are reported cases of hate crimes. And I will tell you, I'd rather be in a county where law enforcement is doing their job and documenting the crime as a hate crime, rather than one of the 4 cities that reported 0 hate crimes. And those were, and this is 2007 according to the FBI statistics, the FBI gathers the information and puts them into the Unified Crime Report. That's where they come from. Now those 4 cities that did not reported 0 hate crimes in 2007 were Tulsa, Oklahoma, Oklahoma City, Tucson, Arizona, and Miami, Florida. So Sheriff, please take heart that you are just doing an excellent job with your deputies in gathering those numbers.
Somebody who talks to law enforcement officials around the state, I can tell you there's a big attitude in different parts of a crime is a crime. There is no special categories. And that's the mission of, well, that's the culture of the organization, and that's unfortunate.
I am Rashawn Banks, and I'm a lawyer, and I work with Marsha at the NAACP. We do a legal redress clinic. And so my question is to Sharon, because I think you might have a resource that we need. What role does the AG's office play when these people have these hate crimes? I know they can go to the state attorney, to the sheriff, but what role does the AG's office have?
I have to say this with very little. It is based on, we will work with local law enforcement. We only, under the Hate Crimes Reporting Act, which is 877, we only calculate, we compute the data and issue the report. So the Hate Crimes Act itself, that 775, is only the enhanced penalties, so local law enforcement are the ones who make the arrests. So the Attorney General's office's responsibilities are limited only to producing that hate crimes report that will come out in January again of every year. So we're very limited as far as that. Now, under 760, under the Civil Rights Act in Florida, that's where our office can assist if there has been violations, civil rights violations. So that's probably where our office can assist.
I'm Bob Collier. I live in Coral Ridge. A lot of people tonight have been talking about the importance of the fact that you have to be taught to hate. It's interesting tonight, and I would like to ask this question, do we have very many religious leaders of some of our more conservative or even regular church groups here at this meeting? And I'm just wondering if they have been reached out to, because we know that very often some churches and ministers have been preaching hate in their own congregations. And I think that if you give that information to a group of people to hate other people who are other than you or different than you, then that almost gives them the right to behave as perhaps those 2 men or 5 men that picked on those 2 guys that night, or a homeless person, or a black person, or a homosexual person. I'd just like to know why we do not have more religious leaders at this meeting tonight.
I'll answer that quickly. This evening, the primary focus this evening was to talk about the Hate Crimes Task Force Initiative, and that was the bigger focus. This is a series of several discussions that will continue throughout the county. The NAACP will be taking on the next town hall forum on this. And I think the NAACP has an incredible relationship with religious leaders where that may be one of the focuses she may want to include as part of that. So it's a very good point.
I'm with Lambda United, the Gay Straight Alliance, and FAU Boca. My question is, the religious thing just brought that up, it popped right back in my head. I went to Catholic school my entire life, and it wasn't until 15 I came out in high school. And I was a victim of constant hatred and ridicule, defilement of my car, things like that. But people told me there was nothing that I could really do because the school's hate crime policy did not mention sexual orientation, and they basically preached against sexual orientation and homosexuality. So, is that true? Was there really nothing I could do? That's my question.
What state did you grow up in? In Florida? Well, the school's policy has nothing to do with it. It's what the state statute is. What year was that? In 04. Well, the hate crime statute was in place at that time. And yes, if you would have made a police report to a law enforcement agency, I know at BSO we would have treated it as a hate crime. It is, school policy has nothing to do with it. It's the state statute. And if you would have, did you report to a law enforcement agency? Okay, now you know, right? Okay, thanks. That's the point of this thing tonight.
Walter Van McLaughlin. I'm very active in All Saints Episcopal Church in Fort Lauderdale. My question is, can you give us some hardcore, simple suggestions of how not to wind up as a victim?
I wish I had a plan on how not to be a victim. law enforcement, usually the crime prevention officers will have suggestions of how not to be a victim, being aware of your surroundings, locking your doors, all of those things. And usually I defer to law enforcement for that because, to be honest with you, I did everything right that night. I mean, there is no such thing as totally preventing the crime, but you can reduce your risks.
We wanted to leave you with a little souvenir tonight. I talked about those 56 hate crime groups that are in Florida. And we want you to know who they are, the symbolism they use between the tattoos and everything else. And we have this poster that's put out by the ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center documenting those groups so that you could keep it here, number one, to remember what we were talking about tonight. And it's about education. And hopefully this poster will document for you that we all need to be aware of these groups that are right here in the state of Florida. And this will tell you a little bit about each one, their symbolism. And again, we want to leave that with you just as a remembrance of what we talked about here tonight. So Michael, on behalf of BSO, I want to thank you and the GLCC, the Log Cabin Republicans, the Dolphin Democrats, the ADL, the NAACP. Thank you for hosting this. Let's keep it going, and just a little souvenir for you guys. Thanks.
I would like to just thank everybody for coming out, and I hope to see even a bigger crowd in 6 months. Thank you.